How you started writing it?
Haiku poetry, well, it goes back to the 1960s when I read the biography of Vic Hummert. That's when I was first introduced to haiku. And I just became fascinated on how you could take one idea and compress it into 3 lines and 17 syllables. So I actually started to write haiku. And when I came down to Texas in '89 with the hope of doing environmental education, I found that people cannot deal with compound concepts. I'll give you the example of Kirkpatrick Sale. He's kind of a social critic and a philosopher, an economist, I think. And he said, if it had been the design of human history to bring the earth to the edge of ruin, there's no more perfect mechanism than the free market economy. So I would go around to universities and high schools and try to get across this concept that the free market economy is very dangerous and unhealthy to the planet. But everybody who's sitting in a classroom is part of it, as I was, was told from grammar school on. Get good grades, graduate from a nice school, go on to a good university, maybe Cornell or someplace like that, and graduate and then get a good job, high-paying job, and just get out there and make money with little regard, no regard for the planet. And when I would talk about the free market economy, I was discovering that students could not pick up what I was trying to say. Even if I would repeat it 3-4 times, the compound concepts just did not sink in. Mosquitoes out here in the country. So I thought, well, it's the television that has really impacted our brains. We have to have things almost like a haiku. It has to be very brief, concise, and then be brief, be bright, be gone. Well, with a lot of things regarding the environment, you have to sit down and explain what's going on. So, as I did the environmental education in Texas for 5 years, I thought nobody is paying attention. So I decided to start writing haiku, to squeeze little ideas down into 3 lines. For example, the major cities of Texas are all choked from traffic. So I have a little simple haiku like, the automobile economy is an irreversible mistake. Now, I have good friends who sell cars. I don't say that in front of them, but the automobile economy has gridlocked every city over 100,000. And right now, I'm living in Lafayette, Louisiana, and after Hurricane Katrina, it has 150,000 people here, and the traffic is unbearable. So before the hurricane hit, it was even unbearable. And it's an automobile economy. People don't ride in the buses. So the haiku, Thomas Berry, in the introduction to my second book, he said the haiku is incisive. It'll be something like a dart that goes right to the center of our consciousness. And even before we have a rebuttal, it's planted, it's stuck in there. What I said, for anybody watching this, the automobile economy is an irreversible mistake. You can't deny it. You just can't deny it. And it's stuck in there. And you can come up with all kinds of excuses. But no matter how many roads you build, you still are not going to overcome traffic congestion because they're going to sell more cars to stay ahead of it. So with the haiku, I don't know, maybe I can just get my point across and then move on. As a Catholic priest for 30 years, I was exposed to the writings of Teilhard de Chardin, who is a very prophetic man. He died in 1955. But Teilhard is somebody that has to be read to try to understand the role of religion and spirituality in saving the earth. Teilhard said that we are the earth coming to consciousness. And as a Catholic priest, it was only once a year, on Ash Wednesday, when we would go about with a little bit of ashes on our thumb, put the ashes on someone's forehead and say, remember you are from the earth, and to the earth you shall return. So that is the one reminder in the liturgical year that we are from the earth. And according to Teilhard, he made that radical jump that we're more than just earth, we're the earth coming to consciousness. All those philosophical concepts of we're the earth hoping, the earth loving, and now, in the 21st century, we're the earth defending and fighting. We're trying to protect itself from the onslaughts of industrial plundering, which is going on, and all in pursuit of profit. So the earth is really fighting back right now. So maybe Katrina and Rita and Wilma, those 3 hurricanes that hit us in 2005, I'm speaking from South Louisiana here, maybe those hurricanes are little reminders that we can't go on abusing the earth the way we did. So I tried environmental education in Texas and decided to move on and do hospice work in Lafayette, Louisiana, tending to cancer victims. Why are 3 out of 4 people, I don't know the exact statistics, but out of every 4 people you're going to find at least 1 getting cancer, and there's a relationship there. Leaving environmental education to come and to treat cancer patients, AIDS victims, or TB, whatever. There's a relationship there between treating the victims and what I was trying to do in Texas. But before I came to Texas, I was invited to go to El Salvador on an environmental tour. And there I discovered I wasn't wasting my time. So we arrived in San Salvador, which was just choked with traffic and buses belching out black smoke from the diesel machines. And we went to a Center for Appropriate Technology where the director, Dr. Ricardo Navarro was his name, 2 PhDs, one from Purdue and the other from Washington University. He said, "Welcome to El Salvador," but he said, "I have to warn you about some things down here." He said, "Number 1, it's dangerous to breathe our air. Number 2, it's dangerous to drink our water. 3, you'll get sick if you eat our food. So what's left?" And he said, "The other danger is to preach the gospel." Referring back to November of 1989, when the government killed the Jesuit priests who were considered to be too progressive. If you shake the hand of a peasant in El Salvador, it's considered to be a revolutionary act. So the way to deal with them is to kill them. So the air, the water, the food, and the gospel. For me, they're integrated. If we don't talk about taking care of the air and the water and the food, we're not preaching the gospel. Because we're not just spirits. We live within a body. And if we're not taking care of the body, holistic salvation is not going to take place. And that's why we're taking care of the air, the water, and the food. So that was my eye-opening experience in El Salvador. I wasn't wasting my time. People just weren't listening. So I came back and I decided to continue writing a haiku. A haiku, for a lot of folks who are not clear what it is, it started in the 1700s. And it was 3 lines, 17 syllables, 5, 7, and 5, all in praise of nature. Now, to go from Japanese to English is very difficult because Japanese is a vowel consonant language. So in English, if you have 17 syllables and 3 lines, that's sufficient. So in my lifetime, I've just seen nature disappear so quickly that I decided to turn haiku around and write it, not in praise of nature, but in defense. My God, Earth defending herself. So I write haiku in defense of nature. And I always carry my haiku notebook with me. And thanks to a good friend, Adam Chandler, up in Cornell University in Ithaca, New York, I have 5,000 haiku in the pipeline. And right here, I'm on number 6,840. And actually, this is a relevant one. Going back to a man by the name of Dr. Ignaz Semmelweis in the 1840s. He was a Hungarian physician who told the doctors, look, if you go from treating a sick patient to delivering a baby, you are carrying diseases from a sick person to a new life. And they told him that he was crazy. These are doctors telling him that he was crazy because of this theory. Well, he did go crazy because he could not believe that doctors would be so ignorant. And that reminds me of I think it was a novel called The Hellstrom Chronicle, where there is no intelligence, there is no stupidity. And when we live by instinct, we're going to perhaps do better than just trying to survive on intelligence, because intelligent people did not accept the fact that you had to wash your hands before treating sick people. Well, if you go to a restaurant now and use the restroom, there's a sign on the door which says restaurant workers are required by law to wash their hands. But we have to remember that it took 40 years before people accepted Dr. Semmelweis. It's Semmelweis. Mosquitoes again. West Nile mosquitoes down here in Louisiana also. It took 40 years for that theory to be accepted. But we don't have 40 years to play around. It's a question now, do we have 40 years to accept the fact that we have to do something very drastic within the next 10 years? Or, the future is going to be very difficult. So that's where I am with environmental education.
I wonder if you might read us a few of your recent haiku.
Yeah. Now, I haven't shined these up. These are...
So how does that work? You do kind of a first draft and then you come back to it?
Well, yeah, just as I work in a jail, and if I'm waiting for the deputies to bring an inmate out so that I can visit with them, and it's a slow process, I sit down and work on the haiku. So this is just the rough draft. I don't have this one shined up yet. Do we have 40 years to plunder our planet before waking up? It's a question. Are we waking up? So the earth is trying to wake us up. 6,700 and some.
Is there another one? I'll pause here and let you choose a couple.
In May, my wife and I went to a famous monastery in Kentucky called Gethsemane. It's famous because Thomas Merton lived there for 25 years. Merton wrote 66 books, mainly on spirituality. Well, I found out that a good friend of mine who was out there in the monastery, when I told him of my interest in taking care of the environment, he said, well, by the time the crunch really comes on, we're going to be dead anyway. And I said, Mike, the crunch is on. The crunch is on. And if you lived in the big cities, you would feel it. So after I got his rather narrow opinion, it doesn't sound right. So I just kind of wrote a rough draft here. Monasteries will thrive only through God's pure air, water, and decent food. If they don't have good air, water, and decent food, they're not going to survive. No matter how much they pray, they're still going to be in difficulty. Oh, another religious thought is, people ask me, well, as a priest, why are you so concerned about the environment? What's the point? And then I talk about the different kinds of prophets, because we're now living in the era of a new prophet. A prophet like Moses could say to the people, well, no, if you're being oppressed, we just pick up and we move on, get out of here. And then prophets like Jesus would come along and say, if you're not being oppressed, but you don't have a free spirit, you're not free, which means you have to have a heart that's free of selfishness and egotism and provincialism. You just have to be free spiritually. Then there's a prophet in the 21st century, actually in the 20th century beginning, I think, where the prophet says, it's an ecological prophet, if you're not being oppressed physically and you're free spiritually, through your life in Christ, but you don't have decent air, water, and food, you're not free. No matter how ideal life is for you spiritually, if you don't have the means to support your body without disease, you're not free. And that's where we are today. So Teilhard de Chardin is one of the most important of the environmental prophets. He said that we are the earth becoming conscious. And Thomas Berry, who is to me like Teilhard reincarnated, he's one of my real mentors. I was fortunate enough to have 3 mentors in my life. But Thomas Berry is one of them. And I can remember my first meeting with Thomas in 1986 up on the Hudson River in New York. I'm sitting there overlooking the Hudson River, which is polluted from General Electric, by the way, PCBs from General Electric. And Thomas says, the question now is the earth viable or not? Well, is it viable, Thomas? And he said, in many places it's not. It's not. Then I thought back on my experience belonging to a missionary group. I was able to spend 10 years in Hong Kong. I spent a year in Latin America. And I was able to pass through and visit altogether about 24 different countries. Every country where I have been, I find it to be an environmental disaster. And having lived in Harlem for 2 summers, 65 and 66, that too is a real environmental disaster. So this accumulated experience of seeing the air, the water, and the soil just being degraded, and wondering, well, what are we leaving for future generations? So that's why I continue to write haiku. And, my friend puts them on the internet, and responses are always welcome.
Roll 'em.
Oh. Well, since these haiku can go around the world, thanks to my friend up in Cornell, I got a sharp email one time, and it was from Japan, and the writer asked me, why do you take haiku and spoil it? Why do you take haiku, which is poetry about the beauties of nature, and twist it towards your own personal political motivations? And well, that's pretty rude. And I thought it over, and I emailed back to the writer in Japan. Well, when Basho was alive in the 1700s, there was a superabundance of trees, flowers, birds, wildlife. Nature was just glorious. So all he had to do was sit down on a park bench or just sit down in the country somewhere, and he would be inspired to write a haiku poem. But now, in the 21st century, that's all disappearing. When I was a child, growing up in Illinois, so many of the things that I saw are gone. Birds don't sing anymore. People have never even heard of the birds that I knew as a child. So I responded to the writer in Japan that I take the liberty of turning haiku around and writing it in defense of nature. And in the next life, I will ask Basho for forgiveness.